you. Welcome and thank you for joining this global town hall hosted by the McDonnell International Scholars Academy. My name is Kurt Dirks and I'm the Vice Chancellor of International Affairs and Director of the McDonnell Academy. We'll introduce everyone in just a few moments, but before that, let me give you a little bit of background on today's event. Today, we are all scheduled to be here together to have the 8th annual McDonnell International Scholars Academy Symposium. Of course, the pandemic changed all of that. So we had to decide, do we continue and how do we pivot? First thing we decided was that it was really critical to continue this event. The issues that we were going to talk about not only continued, but got worse through the pandemic. And so we thought it was really important to bring us all together to think about those issues. Second, we thought it would be important to bring everyone together just as we had before, which is individuals across the globe and across disciplines to be able to think about these problems. And so as you look at our panelists today, they really represent that from all different regions of the world and many different disciplines. And then the third issue was to think about how we shift from problems to solutions, and fear and anxiety that many of us are experiencing to hope and optimism. And so that brings us to today and the theme of today's event, which is which is hope in the time of uncertainty. We have about 300 people from across the world today, and welcome to all of you. We greatly appreciate you joining us to think through these very important issues. What I'd like to do is do a few special welcomes to go ahead and kick us off. And first, I'd like to welcome John McDonnell, Mark Wrighton, and Jim Wirch. These three individuals were instrumental in starting the McDonnell Academy, and this is our 15th anniversary. So welcome to the three of you. Second, I'd like to do a special thank you to some of the university leaders who are signed on today, who are not on our panel, but who are joining us from their respective institutions. Jana Joha from Budapest University of Technology and Economics is the rector there. Marcelo Knoebel from the State University of Campinas. Quan Chong Meng from National Taiwan University. Henk Kumelin from Utrecht University, and Oh Seng Yong from Seoul National University. Thank you for joining us and making time to spend this evening or this morning with us. Finally, I'd like to welcome all those faculty, those students, and those friends of the Academy from throughout the world for being here with us today. We are going to, by the way, have an opportunity to hear from some of those university leaders in videos later on. And so bear with us while we go through the program for a little bit. Before we go farther, I would like to ask our Chancellor, Chancellor Andrew D. Martin, to deliver some opening remarks. Chancellor Martin is the 15th Chancellor of Washington University and started in 2018. From 2014 to 2018, he had served as the Dean of the College of Literature, Science, and Arts at the University of Michigan, and previously had held various positions at Washington University, including the Charles Nagel Chair of Constitutional Law and Political Science here at Washington University. Chancellor Martin, thank you for joining us today, and if you'll pop on your camera, we'll have you deliver a few opening remarks.
Great. Well, thank you, Kurt, and greetings everyone from Washington University in St. Louis. I would normally say good morning, but I recognize that many of you are joining us from all over the world. I want to say how honored and grateful we are that you are with us for this global town hall. I also want to give a special thanks to those at the McDonnell Academy who have worked tirelessly to pull off today's event, especially after pivoting from what was once supposed to be an in-person symposium to a virtual meeting today. This moment also serves as a chance for me to share a special thanks to the McDonnell family and John McDonnell specifically for their generous support of the Academy over the past 15 years. John was involved in forming the vision for this important program in its earliest days and has remained actively engaged as a thought leader, benefactor, and visionary advisor. We are immensely grateful to you, John, for your leadership and commitment to the McDonnell Scholars Academy and to Washington University. I do look forward to the day when we can gather together in person again, as it is such an important component of our shared work. For now, I'm delighted with the lineup of presenters and panelists we'll hear from today. No matter the format, at the McDonnell Academy, we believe it is absolutely paramount to engage in dialogue and work across disciplines and across nations to address the problems facing our world, as well as our respective locations and regions. What we do together benefits all of us, both globally and locally. The theme for this town hall is hope in a time of uncertainty, with the specific question, what gives you hope for the future? As I said in the short video message we were asked to record prior to today's event, while it can be difficult to find hope under the circumstances in which we currently live, I see hope right here in each of you and in the very organizations that make up this partnership. Working together, we are utilizing our collective strength to solve some of the world's most pressing challenges. Challenges such as climate change, malnutrition and hunger, racial violence and xenophobia, women's health and equity, and so much more. Together, we have already come so far, and that alone gives me hope for the future. I am confident that given the strides we have already made, we will continue to chip away at these and many other challenges facing our world. Once again, I am extremely grateful to our partner presidents, faculty, and students for their participation in this critical work, for the president supporting these important goals, for the faculty conducting collaborative research, which is a significant element of the Academy's vision, and for those of you who are students, for your commitment and aspirations to take on these issues through your lives and your careers. At Washington University, we are proud of the international relationships we have built with you over the years, and we are also proud to have a vibrant and robust international community of scholars and students on our campuses here in St. Louis. At WashU, we believe wholeheartedly in the intrinsic value of our international community and are grateful for the unique perspectives and contributions they bring to our work and mission. Our international community enhances everything we do, and we see their presence as a mark of distinction as we prepare and educate people to lead and serve in a rapidly changing global society. Given our current climate and the political rhetoric that sometimes serves to divide rather than unite us, it is more important than ever to be extremely clear about our position and reiterate these important values. This year marks 15 years since the McDonnell Academy and its partners first joined together under our shared approach to understanding the issues facing our world. And I look forward to many more years of global collaboration for the sake of the common good. To that end, I also look forward to meeting all of you and welcoming you to our campus, hopefully in 2021. Thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us. I'd like to close by posing the same question to you. What gives you hope for the future, and how are we continuing to build momentum? Thank you.
Thanks, Chancellor Martin, for sharing those ideas and for sharing your thoughts on what gives us hope and what we can do going forward. We very much appreciate your continued support and are excited when you can host all of us on campus here again.
Thank you, Kurt.
Well, now we're going to go ahead and turn to our panelists. I think we have an outstanding panel today from our partner network. We have 7 speakers from 7 different disciplines and different corners of the globe. We've asked them to reflect on 2 issues in the short talk, which is what global problem presents the greatest concern for you today, and how does your area of expertise address that? And then second is what gives you hope that we can address that problem? After that, we will shift to a panel discussion with questions from the audience. And so I'm really excited to hear what each of these experts has to say from their expertise and from their perspective. We'll go ahead and introduce each panelist, and we're going to do this in alphabetical order. They'll do about a 5-minute talk, and then we'll move to the next panelist. So with that, we're going to go ahead and kick off. So we're going to start from Israel, and our first speaker is Dr. Nadine Bado-Trachtenberg. She's a faculty member at the Tompkins School of Economics and IDC Herzliya. She has over 20 years of experience in the banking sector and served as the Deputy Governor of the Bank of Israel from 2014 to 2019. She brings expertise in macroeconomics, the economy of Israel, and issues in economics and globalization. Nadine, thank you so much for joining us today for this event, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kurt. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all. This is quite a daunting questions that you put to us. Let me say something, and I'm going to be talking, of course, in the realm of economics. You know, the present coronavirus pandemic has paradoxically both emphasized some of our most pressing economic and social problems, as well as distracted us from them. So I'd like to remind ourselves of what the past decade or so of economic development has delivered and what were the problems. Remember, a little over a decade ago, the world saw its worst financial crisis since World War II, the heart of which was not in the peripheral countries, but very much in the largest and most advanced economies of the world. It was in the US and in Europe. The development following that crisis has been very slow and protracted. In fact, it was deemed by IMF director at the time, Christine Lagarde, as too slow for too long. So not only it stretched our economic policy tools, both fiscal policy and monetary policy, beyond what was deemed possible until then, but it also showed the limits of these tools, given that clearly they were not able to cope with underlying structural problems. So by now, it's been pretty much accepted in the profession that what we are facing in terms of economic development is what has been called secular stagnation, meaning that the path of economic growth that is ahead of us has permanently slowed. It's no longer at the pace that we had been used to, and what we're seeing ahead is much slower growth due to various reasons: demographic changes such as aging populations, a global rebalancing of political and economic power that has thus global imbalances in flow of funds, but also institutional inertia, including the inability of political institutions to tackle issues that require a longer horizon than our day-to-day, if you want, immediate economic issues. So the past decade has brought us, I think, to the recognition that our market-based economic growth model, the very one that has lifted so many millions and billions of people out of poverty, and by now adopted pretty much around the world, was delivering persistent and growing economic inequality and wealth inequality. So not only have wage growth been enjoyed mostly by the upper decile of our now highly stratified society, but economic mobility has also waned and wealth inequality has deepened. Not only that, but even that slower pace of growth did not stop the continuous environment degradation and has led us, now I think, to recognize the global climate change crisis, which is affecting, of course, all regions of the world, and its very non-linear implications, of which are still difficult to comprehend and have not yet been internalized by many people and by policymakers around the world. So in a sense, the past decade of economic development was, on the one hand, unable to pursue the fast pace of economic growth, needing increasing fiscal and monetary stimulus, both of which, by the way, have secondary effects that can be quite dangerous. And on top of that, increasingly not allowed a lot of people to benefit from that economic growth. So fewer people saw their rise in income or wealth. Fewer people can expect to eventually benefit from that. Work-life balance in many countries has become more and more inaccessible. And our planet, of course, is suffering from massive side effect of this growth. So even before the present pandemic, it was becoming more and more obvious that our biggest economic problems and social problems are due to the unchecked success of an economic paradigm that has turned into a dogma. So it is a daunting problem. Now, what gives me hope in this sad environment? Well, this present crisis, this present pandemic crisis, which is very much a global one, which is very unequal on its impact on society, and that's true all over the world in all countries. The people at the poorest end of the stratification are suffering more than the people at the upper end, and not all crises are like that, by the way. This one is very much like that. It has exacerbated and accelerated all of the problems that I mentioned earlier. And I think from that is arising a sense of urgency, not only to cope with our immediate coronavirus pandemic economic fallout, but also to cope in part with why it is so painful and so difficult to deal with it from an economics perspective, not from a health perspective. So we need this very painful event may bring with it a silver lining. And the silver lining is that it is forcing us to think again about what is important to us individually, at the society level, and at the global level, and to design the appropriate policies. Now, one of the most difficult questions for policymakers is when you're a policymaker, you need a target, you need an indicator, you need to know where you want to reach. And the issue of measurement, what do we actually measure, determines very much what the policy is going to be. And economics has been very, I would say, archaic in what we measure and how we measure things. Most of our, what we compute as economic growth has been mostly designed in the 1940s with the tools at hand and also with the cultural bias at hand. So, of course, no thought was put into measuring, for instance, women's work at home. And a lot of thought was being put into how do you measure imputed rent on houses, which was also not in economic activity that you saw in the market. So it's both archaic and completely a mismatch to what we're seeing. And yet that's the tool, that's the indicator that all our policymakers are focusing on. So yes, we've made some improvement, and there's been great effort from the UN Human Development Index, and more recently the OECD measuring a better life index, trying to measure other things than just economic output. But these efforts have been mostly paying lip service to the real underlying problem. And similarly, we also know economics that we know how to use, we have policy tools to deal with side effects, which we call negative externalities, particularly using taxes, but we've made very little use of them and in a very weak form. I think that now what gives me hope is that data and dealing with data that used to be very much sort of a back office type of issue, and no glory was brought to the people who worked on data. We're now in an era where data is exciting. It's exciting lots of people. And the issue of measuring things that we didn't measure before has now not only become feasible, but has also become attractive. If we measure better, if we measure things that are important to us, then the policy tools can easily be designed to target them. And so I would say, quoting the famous quote of Albert Einstein on the issue, not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. For economists, a very important thing is to try to reduce that gap between what's being counted and what counts. And today the gap is still very wide. So we're still focusing on, policy tools that are, if you want, that are encouraging these very bad developments. And I think it's become clear, and this pandemic is making this even more clear. So that gives me hope that better measurement will also bring better policies.
Well, great. And I think you did a fantastic job of connecting how economics is tied into some of what we're, I think, going to hear from some of the other speakers today. So it was a really interesting talk. And I think we'll be back. You have a number of questions, I know, from the audience. So thank you again for those ideas.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Dr. Shalini Bharat, and she joins us from Mumbai, India. Dr. Bharat is the director of the Tata Institute of Social Sciences. She's widely known for her work on social determinants of health, young people's and women's health and well-being, the social aspects of HIV and TB, amongst other issues. And Shalini, I know you've joined us at past symposiums, and thank you for being here with us again today to share your thoughts. I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you so much for inviting me. And this is a very important webinar on a very important topic. The question, of course, is very difficult, but I would like to say that in my view, at this point in time, the vulnerable becoming even more marginalized and vulnerable presents the greatest concern today, whether it be in the context of the current pandemic or unsustainable growth and environmental degradation or increasing polarization we see all around us. Let me focus on the pandemic for the moment, which has exposed the fault lines in our social fabric like never before. With massive job losses, wage cuts, displacements, and forced reverse migration, the poor everywhere are facing a bleak future, and the daily wage earners have almost nothing to fall back on. By any standards, in over a century, the COVID pandemic impact has been harsh and cruel for people, but it has been the cruelest and the harshest for those already living on the fringes of society and or those who are vulnerable owing to their gender, age, social and economic status, stigmatized and compromised health conditions, remoteness of location, and even sexuality and other similar conditions of marginalization. Visuals of the urban poor forced to walk thousands of miles in appalling and challenging conditions to reach their homes in rural India in order to escape both hunger and the virus are testimony to the fact that those subsisting on the informal sector and low-end jobs, earning by the day and without health security, are hit the hardest and pushed into further misery. The situation of women and senior citizens among them, already less resourceful, is particularly worrisome. Deaths of older patients in disproportionate numbers due to COVID in parts of Europe and the US is another example of how the vulnerable are getting pushed further into the cycle of precarity and insecurities. Those living in urban informal settlements with inadequate infrastructure are further burdened by the challenges of lockdown and social distance norms in the face of dense living conditions, shared water taps and toilet facilities, and lack of shared rations. The condition of women in sex work, including transgender women and gay men, can also be expected to be extremely precarious because they are already stigmatized and really vulnerable to infections like HIV. Among the student population, educational continuity is under serious threat for the poor and socially disadvantaged students and those from remote locations who lack computers or smartphones and stable internet connectivity and money to pay for data packs, as teaching has gone online almost everywhere. Another group of vulnerable people are those with pre-existing mental health conditions who are further stressed and unable to continue with treatment due to lockdown and diversion of health services for COVID. And I can go on and on. So what are we doing at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, which is a community connected university? Our faculty and students work on multitude of social issues and with a wide range of most vulnerable groups, including women facing domestic violence and mental health issues, incarcerated population groups and under trials, street-based homeless people, and so on. And so during this COVID time, we have been working in a large neighboring informal settlement to provide dry ration kits, run 4 community kitchens serving over 32,000 meals per week for almost 2.5 months, and supplementary nutrition for 3,500 women and children for 3.5 months. We distributed masks and sanitary pads to over 100,000 people, provided telemedicine services, also created communication, video clips for community residents to deliver correct COVID information in local language and to see how they can cope with the pandemic, social norms, etc. We also created a dedicated free, safe and confidential phone-based telecounseling service just for COVID in 8 Indian languages. Nearly 3,000 people have accessed the service in the last 5 months. Research was done, a survey of 10,000 plus migrant workers with a follow-up mobile tracker service to work on livelihood restoration activities in association with the government of the home state of migrants. We also did mapping of essential services in Mumbai city to connect them with underserved city locations. Uninterrupted psychosocial counseling and social protection linkage services for drug-resistant TB patients in 4 Indian states, and joint advocacy work to decongest the local prisons for preventing the outbreak of COVID infection, due to which almost 10,000 prisoners were released on temporary bail as a result from the state prisons. Now, the question that we pose to ourselves is, the pre-COVID world itself was a challenge for the most vulnerable among us. How much more challenging will the post-COVID scenario be for them? And how can we work to make it less challenging and better than before? But of course, we are not losing hope, because hope comes in many forms. And I would say that there are a couple of things that we look forward to. One, of course, is the global commitment to uphold the cause of a greater good in the face of the pandemic, and the resolve of political leadership almost everywhere to invest in fighting the pandemic and mitigating the hardships caused, especially to the vulnerable sections, a recognition of the and widespread use of technology, and above all, I think the resilient communities, the ability of communities to bounce back, to resist collapse and to bounce back. But of course, by this, I do not mean that we must place onus on communities to do everything for themselves. I think this is a time when the state must leverage the strength of communities to be resilient and engage with them to bring back normalcy in their lives. And I think the pandemic has given us a silver lining to pause and think, how do we build back better? But everything can happen with partnerships and with collaborative work. Thank you. I'll pause for the moment.
Thank you, Shalini. Having visited Tata Institute a number of years ago, I was so impressed with how integrated you are with the community and how passionate you and your students are about that. So I think that paints a nice, very impressive picture of that. We'll be back in a little bit with questions from the audience. Thank you. Our next speaker is Dr. Barnabas Nwangwe, who's the Vice Chancellor of Makerere University. Makerere University in Uganda is our newest McDonnell Academy partner, joining the network this summer. And so we wanted to be able to use this opportunity to introduce our partners to Makerere University and Makerere University to the McDonnell Network. And so I invited Dr. Nwangwe to speak. This is our second partner, by the way, on the African continent. Dr. Nwangwe had planned to join us live today, but at the end of last week had a potential that he may miss today come up. And so he recorded a video just in case he could not join us today. And so we are going to hear his remarks from video, and we will get to meet him at another time. Go ahead and start the video, please.
Hi, I bring you greetings from Makerere University in Uganda. And we are very happy to be collaborating with Washington University at St. Louis. Unfortunately, I have not been able to physically address you during this town hall, which is addressing the contemporary problems facing the world. Of course, right now, the biggest problem that is facing all of us across the world is the issue of COVID-19. the pandemic and the challenges it has caused for all of us. COVID-19 has changed the way we live. It has made travel difficult. It has made collaboration among scientists quite challenging. And a lot of things cannot work the same way they have always worked. The continent where I'm located is likely to be affected worst, although at the moment it is having the smallest number of cases. Scientists have said devastation by COVID-19 could be worst in Africa unless we do certain things. And I would like to hope that we in Africa will be able to contain the situation and that it will not get worse. Because if it gets worse, we do not have the resources to deal with it. Makerere University has been at the center of looking for solutions to the problems that have been brought about by COVID-19. And the results of the effects of COVID-19 are likely to be with us for a long time to come. And we need to plan on how we are going to contain these challenges. So Makerere University has been at the center of looking for solutions for Uganda and the region at large. It is a difficult time for all of us, but we, academia at universities, have got the responsibility to look for solutions. And we will be happy to collaborate with the Washington University and other stakeholders and friends around the world to deal with this problem. Africa, as I've said, might be worst affected. This is especially a problem because we already face a lot of other challenges in Africa. Our region is the worst affected by climate change. Other diseases, emerging diseases that we did not know are coming up. We have a large number of youth coming up who will be looking for employment, and that employment is not there. So COVID-19 is only making the situation worse. But I don't want to believe that we are completely hopeless and that there is nothing we can do about this. I know that with concerted efforts, we can change the situation from misery to prosperity. And through our research, through partnerships with friends around the world, through working with the communities, universities can indeed contribute to changing the bad situation to a more hopeful situation. That's exactly what we are going to do and what we are doing right now as Makerere University. I see light at the end of the tunnel, even with the little interventions that have been made by Makerere University. And I want to call upon all of us to face this epidemic or pandemic head on and make sure that it does not completely disrupt our lives. Together, we will surely overcome COVID-19. Thank you, and I wish everybody an enjoyable conference.
Well, to our friends at Makerere University, the faculty and students, welcome to the McDonnell Academy, and we really look forward to engaging you. Also, we know that there is a very bad fire into the Ivory Tower, which is an iconic building on the campus, so our hearts go out to you as you recover from that event. Now we're going to turn to Dr. Alejandro Porre, who is joining us live from Mexico. Dr. Porre is the Dean of the School of Social Sciences and Government at Tec de Monterrey. He has dedicated his career to the study and construction of democracy in Mexico. Dr. Porre has served in various positions in President Calderon's administration, including National Security Spokesman and Secretary of the Interior in Mexico previously. Alejandro, thank you so much for joining us today.
Quite the opposite, Kurt. I really appreciate this wonderful opportunity to be a part of the McDonnell Academy, and in particular of this symposium with these very pressing questions. I'm very honored to be a part of this panel and to listen to the colleagues from all over the world and to get a chance to interact with you and with the audience. I guess when one looks at what Freedom House has produced as a report of democracy and liberties around the world during the pandemic, during COVID-19, what one sees is a number of issues where democracy has been put at further risk. It's not just police restrictions and police violence on demonstrations. It's not just restrictions on the way in which people report the information about the effects of the pandemic and the capabilities of the health system. It has even gone so far as to modify election dates, conditions for political participation, and the number of systematic issues that make us be especially concerned about the quality and the resilience of democracy under these very difficult conditions. And much as was said earlier in the panel, some of the underlying problems of democratic governance were already there, and the pandemic has only made them even worse. And I think one of the questions that we need to address is whether this is something that is just going to be a short-term issue, and or whether we will get back to a better world in the recent, as it was probably in the recent past, and from that to build up again our capability for greater enhancement of liberty, security, and the enjoyment of rights for larger numbers of people the world over. And our most recent historical example is what happened during the global financial crisis of 2008 and 2009. The impact of that crisis on economic conditions the world over was, in political terms, had two massive effects. On the one hand, a vast majority of the governments lost power through democratic means. And that's kind of something to be expected, and we wouldn't be too worried about that because that's exactly what democracy is supposed to do. You punish those governments that are not able necessarily to respond to crisis, even if they come from abroad. But the other side of the crisis is much more worrisome, which is that beginning in 2009 and all the way over and increasing and systematically being reproduced over the last decade or so, the quality of democratic governance has suffered the world over. So the number of democracies has ceased to increase. So less countries are becoming democratic. But even in those countries that had weaker democracies or not fully institutionalized democracies, the quality of democracy has worsened. So the expectation is that the current economic and health crisis is not just likely to bring together these instances of limited liberties, enhanced repression, electoral shenanigans on behalf of governments, but it's also likely to increase authoritarianism and autocratic governments the world over. The explanation behind this has to do not just with the ability of governments to limit political participation in extraordinary conditions, but more substantially with the degree to which democratic governments and institutions have been unable to respond effectively to the massive challenges brought about by a number of issues, be it the increase in the number of people who demand greater public services, be it the impact of technological change, not just on growth, but also on inequality and the disruptions that it has in the job market, not just some of the financial phenomena that we have already talked about, but more systematically, the limited capacity of a limited number of governments to incorporate a large number of people into the political process, to enhance their rights, to enhance their capabilities, and to enhance their livelihood in a substantially more complex world in which social media, communications, make it even more challenging for nuanced explanations, for complex elaborations of problems, for particular policy-making instruments that have to be especially careful in terms of the instruments that they use. And on the other hand, all of these complexities and all of this uncertainty are making it easier for populist movements and demagogic candidates to make it simple for large numbers of people to try to delegate power to autocratic governments. So those are the things that worry me. And in terms of the quality of democracy, it also is reduced by the absence of multilateralism. And I see Kurt on the screen, which means that I should shift gears and speak a little bit more about what gives me hope. This meeting gives me hope. This capacity brought about by the Washington University in St. Louis and the McDonnell Academy is a very good example of what academia, universities, and it's the networks that we can build together can actually do during these times of crisis. It is true that if we trust the capacity of democracies to bring about change and to contain the harms done by some of the things that our economic models have produced, it is because knowledge, networks, and the very kind of globalization and the sharing of knowledge and the creation of broader networks that we can do and that we are doing at this very moment can actually have the answer to some of these questions. Solutions to how to deal with populist narratives, solutions to how to deal with the disruptions brought about by technological change, how we can actually harness technology to improve the well-being and the conditions of living of a larger number of people, to improve liberties, to improve freedom of the press. And all of these questions are going to be better addressed by networks like this, and in particular by scholars who are part of the McDonnell Academy. So thank you very much for being here and for making me a part of this process.
Well, thank you, Alejandro, for sharing those ideas on the role of government, the challenges, and how each of us can play a key role by engaging through a network like this. And so thank you for being able to, or thank you for taking time to engage in that network with us. I look forward to meeting you. Next up is Dr. Bill Powderly from right here in Washington University. Dr. Powderly is professor of medicine and director of the Institute of Public Health at Washington University. He's also director of the Institute for Clinical and Translational Sciences and co-director of the Division of Infectious Disease. Prior to being at Washington University, he was Dean of Medicine at University College Dublin in Ireland. Bill, thank you for joining us. I know that our medical school is very busy with the pandemic and particularly the Department of Infectious Disease. Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It is a pleasure to be here at this virtual meeting. And it goes without saying, as an infectious disease specialist and as the director of our Institute for Public Health, my major current concern is indeed the pandemic that we face. Indeed, as someone who spent most of his academic career researching and understanding a major pandemic that emerged in the 1980s, I never expected to be involved with a second pandemic in my academic life. But we are here, and I think from a global perspective, we are really still in the early days of this pandemic. In spite of the fact that we have been dealing with it now for almost 9 months, and much of the world has become tired of this pandemic, we must recognize that we are still in an early stage. As of this morning, the WHO reported over 35 million cases across the world with over 1 million deaths. And that's probably the tip of the iceberg in the sense that there are probably many more unreported cases worldwide. But even if you look at those numbers, we're still talking about less than 5% of the world's population has been infected with this virus, which is circulating all around us. And that means that there is still an enormously vulnerable population, a population that we have to develop methodologies and information that they can use in their own lives to help protect themselves and to move forward. And that has been challenged enormously in the current environment, because we live, unfortunately, in a time where science and scientists have become less trusted, often driven by misinformation on social media and deliberate obfuscation or manipulation of the media for political reasons. And that has challenged us enormously as a scientific community. That said, I do have great hope, and indeed I'm very optimistic that the answer will come from science, both on a medical perspective in terms of our ability to look after people who are affected by this disease, and particularly those who are most vulnerable. What this disease has shown us is that not everybody is affected in the same way, and that there are vulnerabilities, particularly in disadvantaged groups in our populations. In countries that have established healthcare systems, the most vulnerable are the old and those who have been left behind in the economies, the poor, the minorities, the disadvantaged. And that is a challenge for us as a society. We are making great strides in terms of our understanding of this virus. If you think about it, we knew nothing about this virus at the beginning of this year. It was a new virus emerging probably in late December of last year. And yet we now have, through tremendous collaborative worldwide scientific discovery, an understanding of how it replicates in humans, how it is transmitted, how it causes disease, and we are designing interventions that will counteract and provide countermeasures to all of those. Most importantly, I am very optimistic that we will have a vaccine. In fact, we will have several vaccines produced as a result of scientific inquiry by laboratories here and across the world. The challenge for us then will be to deploy those vaccines. I would remind everybody in this audience that vaccines have probably been the most important public health advance in the history of man. Vaccines transformed the 20th century. They eliminated killers of humans that confounded human history throughout up to that point in time. They led to many, many children surviving childhood and to take advantage of everything that the world has to offer. So we will develop vaccines for this virus. The challenge for all of us as an academic community is to move beyond that scientific development, not to stop and say, we found the discovery, it's up to someone else to actually figure out how to use it. But we, as the academic community, need to be leaders and producing the leaders who will overcome vaccine misinformation and ensure that those vaccines that are developed by the scientific community are available for everybody in the world on an equitable basis, and not just for the minority of people who can afford to purchase them. That's our challenge. I'm confident we will overcome it, and I'm confident that the Alliance of Universities as represented today will be part of that solution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. And speaking for myself, and I suspect many people, we're very excited to hear of your confidence in having the vaccine and the ability to deploy that. So again, thank you for joining us today. We'll be back shortly with some questions, I'm sure, from the audience. I'd like to move next to Dr. Layla Sadat. She's also here at Washington University in our School of Law. She's the James Carr Professor of International Criminal Law and Director of the Whitney R. Harris World Law Institute. Dr. Sadat is currently the President of the International Law Association, the American branch. She also serves as a Special Advisor on Crimes Against Humanity to the International Criminal Court and is currently working on a groundbreaking project to write the world's first global treaty on crimes against humanity. It's quite a daunting challenge, but extraordinarily important. Layla, thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chancellor Martin, Professor Dirks, distinguished panelists and colleagues, students and friends. It's really an honor to be here today, and my thanks to the McDonnell International Scholars Academy for organizing this timely gathering and for the invitation to be present. As an international lawyer, I think a lot about two issues, effectiveness and compliance. And to explore both as an international lawyer, I start with the Constitution of the international community, which is the UN Charter. The goal of the organization, as expressed in the preamble, is to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, the dignity and worth of the human person, the equal rights of men and women, and of nations large and small, to establish conditions under which justice and respect for the obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained, and to promote proper social progress and better standards of life in larger freedom. I'm reading the text because in a little more than 2 weeks, on October 24th, 2020, the UN will celebrate the 75th anniversary of the Charter's entry into force. Yet that astonishing fact, which is really a miracle of achievement, will likely pass unremarked in the United States of America, the country that penned the first draft of the Charter and that now hosts the institution itself. So we have to ask why. It is true that the UN and the international legal order attached to it has faced challenges. Scandals have rocked many international institutions. And now if one takes a look at the Security Council in behavior sort of reminiscent of the Cold War, we see 3 and sometimes 4 of the 5 permanent members of the council playing the role of spoiler, vetoing resolutions that would help protect civilians from the commission of atrocity crimes, verbally insulting each other, and otherwise exhibiting a woeful lack of global leadership. I'm sorry to say that this has been particularly true of my own country, the United States, over the past 3.5 years, which has withdrawn from 13 important international agreements or institutions and threatened withdrawal from others, including the WTO and NATO. The Trump administration's America First philosophy combines a sovereigntist critique of international law and institutions. It sees them depriving domestic institutions of power with a disdain for human rights and an embrace for authoritarian governments. It also launches a criticism of effectiveness and itself sometimes fails to comply. In this worldview, globalization divides rather than unites. The Pax Americana and any illusion of benign hegemony yields to a transactional approach in which war and the unraveling of the liberal international order becomes increasingly possible. But if we take a step back, the picture is not this bleak. For one thing, research shows that interstate violence has actually decreased markedly over the past 25 years, and the world is more peaceful than ever, except when it comes to state violence against the state's own citizens and the predations of organized crime and non-state actors like ISIS. States, however, are by and large settling their dispute through litigation, mediation, negotiation, and diplomacy, skills that we teach in our law school. There has been an explosion of international litigation and dispute resolution before a variety of courts and tribunals, many of which are relatively new. This includes the longstanding Permanent Court of Arbitration and International Court of Justice, but the much newer International Criminal Court, the African, Inter-American, and European Human Rights Courts, the WTO Dispute Settlement Body, the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, the World Bank International Center for the Settlement of Investment Disputes, and the World Intellectual Property Organization Arbitration and Mediation Center, just to name a few. International institutions and adjudicatory bodies have responded to the need to find real solutions to real problems: business, climate change, boundary disputes, and even pandemics. So here's the good news. The sovereigntist attack on international law and institutions has arisen not because the institutions are objectively failing. Rather, the attack is instead because the institutions are working. They are expanding and deepening their capacity to address transnational and international disputes, and in the case of the International Criminal Court, investigating the commission of international crimes. Likewise, the United Nations is not failing or filled with dictators, murderers, and thieves, as one former UN ambassador alleged in a speech this past summer. Like other global institutions and international law itself, it often serves as a convenient scapegoat for domestic politicians when things go wrong. As a different UN ambassador, Samantha Power, recently wrote, blaming the UN for a crisis is like blaming Madison Square Garden when the Knicks lose. You are blaming a building. Jean Monnet was one of the primary architects of the European community, now the EU, and he wrote that resistance is proportional to the scale of change one seeks to bring about, and is even the surest sign that change is on the way. If the 1990s was the decade of international law, the current backlash is frightening, and yet it's also energizing. It forces proponents of a liberal international order, those who have a commitment to human rights or democracy and the peaceful resolution of disputes, to undertake the really hard work, the transformative work of political and geopolitical transformation. Education is obviously a huge part of that process, which is why a forum like this, bringing together individuals from around the world to explore and connect around issues of common concern, is so important. Cutting our connections to the rest of the world is not what we need. As the pandemic is showing us, it's not connection that's killing us, it's connection without cooperation. And the cure is not further isolation, but deeper connection and research that can support and enhance our collective action. Thank you so much, Professor Dirks, for organizing this global town hall. And thank you, dear colleagues, for your kind attention and your participation today.
Well, thanks for giving us a perspective on international institutions' role they can play. And I'm hearing a common theme from many of you, including you, which is the role of connections and the cooperation, which I think really is something which we're all working towards. So thank you very much for being here with us. We'll be back shortly on the panel. All right, we have our final speaker. We're honored to welcome live from Hong Kong, Dr. Rocky Tuan. Dr. Tuan is a Vice Chancellor and President of the Chinese University of Hong Kong. He's also Professor of Tissue Engineering and Regenerative Medicine at CUHK. He's an internationally renowned biomedical scientist. And in fact, last year, the Times Higher Education magazine listed Professor Tuan as one of the world's most influential academics in higher education. And so, Rocky, with that introduction, we're going to leave you with a tall task. Thank you.
All right. All right. Well, thanks so much for the invitation. This is not like 2 years ago in Beijing, but this is still a wonderful meeting. So we got the speakers that came before me have given some amazing talks. So I'm going to get to this topic right away. So we were asked, what is the global problem of greatest concern? I don't think we need to debate about this. It is COVID-19. And we all live in this house called planet Earth, and COVID-19 is like a hurricane or a thunderstorm that comes through. And we are seeing leaks everywhere. Leaks in the industrial aspects, world economy, labor market, society, et cetera, et cetera. But I think ultimately, the biggest problem is a health crisis. Doesn't mean that we fix that, everything will go away. But if we don't fix it, everything will continue to leak. So my profession, as Kurt said, is in regenerative medicine. What is regenerative medicine? Regenerative medicine has three big R's: repair, reconstruct, and recreate. It is really, to some extent, the newest phase of medicine, which started with preventive, like not catching cold, palliative, like taking some painkiller, therapeutic, like taking antibiotics and drugs, restorative, like having your knee replaced and so forth. So regenerative medicine is actually the next phase of medicine where we try to put things back together. So why is regenerative medicine relevant to COVID-19? Now, it was already stated that vaccine development is happening fast and furious, and it is true. There are probably more than 20 candidate vaccines in development or in clinical trial. So that's going to happen. And hopefully it will happen very soon, and it will be delivered to a lot of people all over the world. However, there is a sequelae of the infection that we need to worry about. That is, you get sick if you actually get the bug. So it is this reaction to the virus that's getting us into trouble. Now, I like to use a very simple analogy to illustrate what our body does when it gets hit by the virus. It's anger management issue. We go into super inflammation. We are trying to fight this thing, but we get angry, which is not a good thing. You start throwing things around and throw things off your desk and dump your suitcase, whatever, because you can't find something. You get angry. So that's what gets us into trouble. Our organs go into dysfunction because we got angry. So is there some way to control this? So this is where regenerative medicine comes into place. The first thing is, can we restore our immune system so it doesn't get angry anymore? It will take things carefully, one step at a time, get rid of the virus, fix this, fix that. Can we do this? Number one. And I believe that regenerative medicine is on its way. It's still a little ways away, but I think we are on our way. The second thing is that can we find drugs? Can we find therapies, whether it's cells or biologics or old drugs that have been sitting on the shelf that will treat some of the symptoms caused by COVID-19? And that's where regenerative medicine also comes into place. Regenerative medicine can recreate little pieces of tissue, micro tissue or organoids, which will represent a very good test bed or platform to screen out the drugs that are not good, dump the things that are not going to work or not safe, and then hang on to those that can go into clinical trial. It really can accelerate this drug discovery process. Actually, about a third to half the money spent on discovering a drug, developing a drug, is actually before you get to clinical trial. If we can eliminate that cost and hasten the timeline, then we can get there much faster. So that's where I think regenerative medicine can help us as well. So two things: anger management, and then finding a test bed so that we can develop therapies for COVID-19. In addition to the development of vaccine, I believe that's how we're going to contain this disease. Okay, why are we hopeful? Well, hope to me is light at the end of a tunnel. But there is one requirement for us to see that light, is that we actually have to have a tunnel first. If you don't have a tunnel, you're never going to see the light at the end of the tunnel. So how is this tunnel built? I believe it's based always on lessons learned from everything that we have done before. So I can think of 4 lessons that we have learned through this whole disaster called COVID-19. The first one is that we actually learned cooperation, cooperativity, and collaboration in a big way. Multi-sourcing is what we learned. Lesson number 1, we've got to work with each other. We cannot be alone. The second lesson that I believe we've learned is the definition of relevance. In business world, there's a saying, you make what you can sell and not sell what you can make. And that's very important. Somebody actually has to want your product. Oftentimes in universities, we kind of live in a quote unquote ivory tower, and we do what we are best at, and we excel, and we take pride in what we do. But sometimes we forgot, is what we're doing really something that people want? I think when COVID-19, all of us have suddenly sit up very straight and say, look, can what I do help someone? Third lesson is that we have learned the importance of interdisciplinary. Someone had used this analogy to tell me what the difference is between multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary. Multidisciplinary collaboration is that I send my sample by Federal Express to the guy in some other place in the country or somewhere else. Interdisciplinary is you actually go to that person's office or lab and sit down and work together. So I believe we have to do interdisciplinary collaboration. Finally, and I think this is really a true lesson that I've learned, is humility. We don't know everything. Now, sometimes we tell ourselves we don't know everything, but it is important that it is humbling to find out that we actually don't know everything. And also, the next thing is that not everything depends on us. Now, in our fight against or protection of the campus, CUHK, or any university, actually, oftentimes the administration and the faculty think they're the most important people on campus. I'm sorry to say we're not. The frontline workers and the professional staff are just as important. It is a lesson that I have learned. In this fight against the virus, we must work together. We have learned humility. I think if we combine these four things, then we will have a tunnel which will lead to light, and that will give us hope. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rack. I think that's those 4 points are so important for us to keep in mind, and this notion of humility, and I think is so crucial. So thank you for bringing that to light.
Thanks.
Okay, in a few minutes, we're going to have all of our speakers come back in the panel and answer questions from the audience. To give the audience some time to send some of those questions in, we're going to play a couple short video snippets from some of our other regions of the world who we are not able to include here. One from Western Europe, one from Australia, and one more from Asia, to make sure we hit each of those. So this is going to be about a very short, about approximately 3-minute video, and then we'll be back with our panel.
What gives me hope? It's the imagination of the scientific director of our sustainability program, who made an exhibition about hope and the power of imagination, because we cannot succeed with logic alone. It's also the creativity of one of our medical researchers, who invited a patient to the lecture room, a patient for whom all treatment options had been exhausted. And he challenged the students to look at the case and come with a new perspective. What gives me hope as well is the enthusiasm of students originating from curiosity and with a deep desire to help. What also gives me hope is the protest of students against me, because I'm not yet able to put an end to the high workload of our teachers. That gives me hope too. Just like the courage of one of our alumni, who based on his insights, wrote a book saying that most people are indeed and in fact trustworthy, and who dared to confront the people in power at the World Economic Forum with the message, multinationals simply have to pay fair taxes. But what gives me hope above all is the power of combining all this together in our university community. A world-class university with a heart. That was the theme of the opening of the academic year here at Utrecht University. And that resonated tremendously. And that gives me hope for the future. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I've been uplifted this year by the spirit of international cooperation that's been directed at understanding and defeating this virus. The global expertise that's been poured into solving this public health challenge is unlike anything humanity has ever seen. My optimism about the future is particularly based on seeing the work of the team here at the University of Queensland that is developing a potential vaccine for COVID-19. They've received extraordinary support from the international scientific community and from partners across the globe. As the project leader, Professor Paul Young, recently said, there's no race between those of us designing vaccines. The race is on for all of us against the virus. This spirit of cooperation fills me with confidence that we will not only defeat the virus, it gives me hope that we will emerge from this crisis with a template for tackling the other big global challenges that the world will face this century.
When National Taiwan University, like other institutions in the world, was confronted with unforeseen challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic, it is the faculty and students' commitment to teaching and learning, their faith in collaboration, and the demonstration of resilience that give me hope for the future. The faculty's eagerness to deliver knowledge through whichever channel was available, and the students' enthusiasm to continue their education despite unprecedented circumstances are incredibly telling during a time of uncertainty. Without knowing what the future holds, the resilience I see in societies and the youth is what institutions like ours should invest in. That is why NTU is inspired to commit to the Global Learning Initiatives Program and work with more than 19 partner universities to develop undergraduate and graduate level curricula through an integrated digital platform. I'm hopeful that at this virtual global town hall, we will inspire and learn from each other to address current and the future challenges in a time of extreme uncertainty.
Let's go ahead and bring back all of our speakers now for the panel. And while we do that, I'd like to let you know that on our website, new website, we have a number of videos from other leaders throughout the world and comments about what gives them hope. Okay, what we're going to do now is do a rapid fire set of questions. We're a little bit behind schedule, and so we're going to ask each of our panelists who get asked a question to be relatively quick, and we'll try to answer as many of these as possible. Okay, I'm going to turn the first question live from the audience. I got to put my glasses on for this. This one is from Jean-Francois Trani, here, one of our Washington University faculty. It's also, by the way, our ambassador to TIS. And here's his question. Are growing social and economic inequalities not the main threat to democracy and democratic principles? And let's go ahead and direct this one to Alejandro and Nadine. If each of you could just provide a few words, a few thoughts on that. Again, so the point is, are growing social and economic inequalities the biggest issue?
I think, thank you, Kurt, for the question, and to Jean-Francois, I think, yeah, like we said before, these were already very significant challenges that are only further enhanced or made more difficult to address because of the pandemic. And I think in particular, the challenge to democratic governance is not just a challenge to liberties and democratic practices and pluralism, it is also a challenge to adequate governance. What we have seen is that a majority of the countries that have substantially more robust democratic systems have been able to respond more effectively, have been able to promote multilateral coalitions that are going to be better able to address this and other challenges. So yes, indeed, economic and social equalities are very significant challenges, but the only way to solve them is with coalitions, both international and domestic, that have adequate policies in place based on science, based on adequate responses, and based on a pluralist perspective that opens up the participation of minorities and other significant issues that adequate governance requires.
Nadine?
I'll just add one thing to that, is that it's not just the economic inequalities by themselves. I think one of the biggest problems is that the mechanic of democracies, of liberal democracies, breaks down when you have groups have very high correlation between inequalities, that it is if you are both economically disadvantaged, if you are part of a marginal group, if you are a group that has cultural and social characteristics that are different from the others, when that highly correlates, then it makes it very difficult for the mechanics of democracy to work well. So I think that's what we are seeing in many countries, is that it becomes impossible to form coalitions in order that will benefit all. So that's I think one of the main challenges.
Very good, thank you. Okay, the next question is from Guy Gennon, one of our faculty in engineering here. Says, all speakers spoke of the importance of connection. Could you share a few words about things that you have done or seen done that have helped promote and sustain connection during these uncertain times? And so this one I'll direct to Dr. Tuan and Dr. Barat as university presidents. Could you share a question that thing that you have seen or done which have really helped promote connection during these uncertain times?
Thanks for the question. One of the casualties of COVID-19 is, of course, international connectivity. In addition to international students not able to come to study and so forth, international student exchange basically has ground to a halt. So what we have done is put together a virtual student exchange program that we have worked through the Association of Pacific Rim Universities. We have 16 universities that have come together in a matter of 2 months, and with 11 universities offering 70 courses, and about 400 students already enrolled in these one course, but together with co-curricular activity, cultural immersion, and social networking. So we basically have used the digital medium to try to fill in this gap, which must be filled because the world has to work together. So people cannot travel, but now they can digitally connect academically and also socially and culturally. So that's what we have done.
Very good, thank you.
Virtual connectivity actually has made us, made our universities function without any disruption. One thing which has been done very well is that we have 4 campuses in 4 different locations, and for the first time we are using faculty to the maximum. So all faculty are able to teach across all campuses, give out their expertise, and be available to students across board, and both in senior years and junior years. It's been wonderful. The other thing that we have done very well is to connect with all our NGO partners and even the partners in the government bodies to be able to move the COVID pandemic agenda forward without actually having to move out of our campuses or move out of our homes, but be able to deliver in the communities the kind of work that I told you we have been doing, especially in providing telecounseling services to a whole range of people, and it has worked very well.
Well, I think this notion of virtual is so prevalent now. I think the interesting question for us all is how long will that sustain? It's all the connections we have here are in some part because we met in person. One of our faculty has met you in person, and so this will keep us going for a while, but I have to admit, I cannot wait to see everyone in person again. Let's see, the next question I'm going to direct, this is a question from 2 of our scholars, Ping Tran Ma and Israt Jahan, ask a similar question. And I'm going to direct this one to Bill Powderly as our expert in this area. Are there lessons we can learn from different countries that should be used for new policies in other countries about dealing with the pandemic?
Yeah, so I would say absolutely. I think one of the things with anything new in any area is that no one's an expert. Everybody claims expertise, but nobody is an expert because it's new, because it's novel. You know, Dr. Tuan talked about the fact that we're dealing with a new virus. We have to understand how it causes disease. That's not an expertise that lives in any one person or any one place. And we've seen from the very beginning that there are people who expound theories on the basis of very little information. And unfortunately, they've been caught up in because for political reasons and adopted. And that, I think, has been dangerous for the public in general. I think we all need to take a step back and this is where the international connectivity is really important. Look at what is working in different places and say, well, would that work in our society? Would that work in our environment? What aspects of it are actually important? And it really becomes a scientific inquiry where we actually break it down and look at what works, how it works, and whether it can be applied in a new and different situation. And by taking that rigorous scientific approach, admittedly very quickly, because this is a crisis, we can actually be much more rational in the way we approach the problem.
Good, thank you, Bill. Okay, I'm gonna do one more question. We're running out of time, and I'm gonna direct this one to Layla Sadat, we haven't heard from yet on as in the Q&A, and I think it also fits you, the nature of the question, as a person who's I've always found to be extraordinarily optimistic and positive. Okay, this question comes from Maria Laura Costa from Unicamp, from Brazil. What can we do to avoid fear and keep hope? We'd be interested in hearing from the panel on how you personally deal with this. You know, what do you do to keep a positive, hopeful view? And could you just share your thoughts on that from your own perspective, Layla?
Thank you so much. Yeah, as an international human rights lawyer that works with the International Criminal Court on atrocity crimes, you have to keep hope all the time. So how do you do that? You know, your photos were fantastic, right? The message of hope from the University of Utrecht, you focus on the positive. That doesn't mean you ignore the negative, right? You have to look at where institutions are failing. You have to look where, you know, even our connectivity is only possible because we're well off in our society. There are plenty of people who aren't well off that can't afford these Zoom calls, et cetera. But the way you focus on that is you look at whatever your small piece of it is, and you do that to the best of your ability. And every time I teach my class in international law, I have 52 students this semester. Many of them are despondent about what's going on, whether it's COVID or global politics or US politics. And I say, you know, every day you just get up and say, what small piece of this can I do? There's a wonderful saying for the Talmud, actually, the Jewish book of wisdom, that says, don't despair by the enormity of the world's problems. Do well now. I'm sort of paraphrasing it off the cuff, but essentially do what you can do and do it to the best of your ability and let the world take care of the rest. And so part of our job is simply to take, whether it's medicine, law, politics, economics, is to take our piece of it, do it to the best of our ability and contribute it to the whole, and do so with humility, right? And do so with cooperation. So I hope that inspires a little bit. I know my own students are feeling very, very concerned. Stay grounded, stay positive, and look to the future.
You know, I think as we wrap up the panel, that's a really important thing for all of us to think about as we get up every day. We can each do a piece. And again, I think, as you say, working together, we talked about today, that should allow us to push through this and should give us all hope and optimism for where we go forward. We're going to wrap up in a few minutes, but before we do that, again, I just want to take one more time to thank this panel. This is a tremendous panel, bringing, again, expertise from all across the world and from many different disciplines. I think it really captures that spirit of cooperation and eventually interdisciplinary work, as Rocky said, that we want to get to. And so thank you, each of you, again, for coming here with us in your morning or evening or afternoon. And we'll look forward to seeing you in person at the next time. So I think you'll hear as a silent round of applause from all of our attendees across the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Okay, we have a couple things before we wrap up, and one very important thing is we had our photo contest, and that theme was hope and resilience around the world. And what we had done is put a call out for photos from all of the students, faculty, from partners across the world. I wasn't sure how many we were going to get we end up with 170 photos from across the world, from 21 different partner universities. You'll see each one of these images posted on our website. The top 30 are here on this slide. Every image tells a story, and we received a wide variety of images: people on the move, our shared humanity, new life, places of resilience, peace, and nature. So I think if you go, and you'll find these really interesting. But what I'd like to do is announce our two, excuse me, our two winners of that. So we had the Sam Fox School here at Washington University. A couple three faculty help us to decide which are the photos which best fit this theme and that we want to feature a little bit more. The runner-up is going to receive a prize of $400, and it comes from Hussein Said Kaplan from Boğaziçi University in Turkey. His photo is entitled "Smile in Spite of Everything." And let me just tell you the background on this story and what Hussein had written to us. Said, "I took this photo in Istanbul. During the COVID pandemic, this photo gives me hope. When I saw this guy sitting in the garage, I asked him, 'Can I take your photo?' He answered, 'Yes.' And he said to me, 'Let me take off my mask.' He said this because he wanted to show his smile under the mask. Nothing covers anyone smiling. It's very powerful." Those were his words. So Hussein, thank you for sharing that with us. And it's a very inspiring photo to all of us. The winner comes from Colleen Smith from Washington University. And her photo is entitled "The Next Generation." Colleen describes this image as follows. This photo was taken in June 2020 in St. Louis City, Missouri. The photo is dad and daughter. Dad works on a project called Dream Builders for Equity in St. Louis, which envisions a community where all people thrive. Dad is looking down at daughter, the next generation, and she's staring at the camera fiercely, giving hope and showing resilience in this moment. So Colleen, thank you for sharing that beautiful photo, that beautiful story with us, and congratulations on winning our contest. Again, thank you to everyone who shared the photo. Again, I'm going to encourage everyone to go to our website and look at this. So if you go to the website, you go to the symposium, and I think you'll see a place to click on snapshots and be able to see those. Okay, I'm going to wrap up with just a few closing remarks, and we'll let you go. We're almost right on time here. We'll be just about 3 minutes late. First, again, thank you to everyone from joining us around the world. And thank you to everyone who made this event possible and participated today. Chancellor Martin, our expert speakers, the presidents who sent in videos, the representatives of the various universities who participated, students, faculty, staff, our McDonnell Academy alumni. I want to do personally a very special thank you to our McDonnell Academy staff. The event that you saw produced today was, they envisioned, and they really brought this to life to run it all smoothly. I can't tell you how many times we ran through this to make this work. So a special thank you to those team members. Again, thanks to everyone for the photo contest and the video responses. I'm going to encourage the entire audience to go and look at those. We do have a few additional events going on with the symposium. So this is not our only event. Our next event is on October 29th, and it's a global conversation on the hidden costs of the pandemic. We're doing this in partnership with the Institute of Public Health here at Washington University, and we'll have speakers from Washington University as well as other universities who are working on this problem and some of the hidden costs of the pandemic. There are also a number of faculty workshops going on focusing on very targeted problems, and you'll be able to see which ones are going on. Some of those are closed, some of those are live. And then finally, we hope to be able to see you next year here in St. Louis, where we hope to be able to host in person and live the next symposium. Okay, I'm going to end with a quote from John McDonald, who we often turn to for wisdom. This is a quote that we frequently use when we at various places, but I think this quote is extraordinarily apt today when we face uncertainty, when we face challenges which really cloud our visions and thoughts. The quote is this: "See far and clearly, think globally, and act boldly." John will try to do that, and I appreciate your thoughts on that and helping us to inspire and think clearly during these times. Again, thank you. With that, we close today. Thank you again so much for all of you who joined us today. and we'll look forward to seeing you in the future. Bye from St. Louis.